Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in the community. What did they do to get started, and what are they doing to stay there? And today, I have another special guest. Her name is Tiffany Haynes. She's the Chief Operating Officer and Chief People Officer at Fingercheck. And Tiffany, I'm so excited to have you on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me.
You know, I was before we started recording, I mentioned I always like to reflect on when I met my guests or maybe when they came into my path. And for you, I remember it was at the Collin County HR. Holly Novak, who I've also had on the show, and you've worked with Holly, was there, and you had come to speak to the Dallas HR group. Do you remember that?
I do. I do remember that. Yeah. Yeah. It was a good day. It was hot. I remember it was hot in Texas that day.
It's always hot in Dallas. Oh my gosh. And
Yeah.
but I just remember you were very inspiring. You were like, you spoke with this conviction that I was like very attracted to. I was like, man, she is really very purposeful and just love everything that you shared that day. And so I've been following you ever since. I remember also I posted on LinkedIn some of my favorite books and you had commented on that. And then you've kind of done the same thing. And so again, I followed you and
Yeah.
you've been very inspiring. So I've wanted to get you on the show for a long time. And you've recently moved to a new company. And that also intrigued me to get you on the show because anytime someone makes change, people like to know, hey, what was that like? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk leadership. We'll talk about the employee experience and all
Mhm.
of that. But first, I would love for you, Tiffany, if you want to just share a brief highlight of Fingercheck for those
Yeah.
listeners and watching the show who don't know, who is Fingercheck and how do you serve your customers?
Yeah. I'll be happy to talk about that. You'll probably hear it multiple times as we chat. But Fingercheck is an all-in-one HR tech and payroll company. They also do on-demand payroll, which I'm really passionate about. But really, we're geared towards removing stress from a small business owner's life. So we're based out of Brooklyn. My home is Missouri, but I work out of Brooklyn. We have nearly 5,000 clients and about 100,000 small business employees that we service. So my background, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, is financial technology and services. So I just love bringing powerful tools and tech to small businesses because they really tend to be underserved in the marketplace, and we need them to stay strong. We need them to stay in business, especially during recessions. So that's a little bit about what Fingercheck is about.
I love that. And I love how you talk about serving the small business community. My mother and father own a bowling center. So they
Oh,
are small
awesome.
business owners.
There you go.
And I will tell
They
you,
need Fingercheck. Yeah,
they
there you go.
they do a
And
lot of
doesn't
old school stuff. Let me just tell you.
Yeah, I know. Construction companies, retail, coffee shops, we all know people who are in small business, and there's a lot of weight and responsibility that goes with that.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially the last couple of years when a lot
Mhm.
of small businesses
Oh,
were hurt through
yeah.
the pandemic, right?
Yes. Yes. Very difficult times.
Hey, let's kick this off. I would love to hear like so. I've been following you on social, but I would love to hear the
Uh-huh.
Tiffany Haynes story. Like, where did you grow up, and how in the world did you get into HR and leadership?
Yeah. Well, I'm a Midwestern woman. So I grew up in Kansas and then later moved to Missouri. When I was in my first year of college, my grandpa, who was just kind of a good side investor, told me about this financial tech company called Jack Henry. And I was working at a different company at the time doing payroll. I was like, okay, I'll check it out. He was like, this is a big deal. You need to know what's going on. And they were like 20 minutes from where I was living. So I checked it out. I got a job. So in 2002, I started working with Jack Henry in one of their contact centers. And there'll be kind of a big circle around how that was important. But I worked nights. I went to college during the day. I paid my way through school, went to grad school, lived on my own. But little did I know, this whole time I was, taking on different roles within the company. And I was with Jack Henry just under 20 years. I held over 9 or 10 different roles, everything from program management to managing director. I became chief people officer. I did that for almost 6 years, reporting to the CEO. And then my last position before I departed was the vice president of our consumer facing contact centers. So the contact center that I started in the very beginning went through different iterations, but I ended up being VP over all of our contact centers at Jack Henry that were consumer facing. So my career has definitely been a lattice and not a ladder in terms of the various roles I've held, but it's been tons of fun. So this last year, I chose to take a risk and really stretch myself, which is what led me to Fingercheck. So, I mentioned my passion for small businesses, and, Fingercheck was just a natural fit for me because it was in kind of the financial tech space with the payroll piece, but also crossroad with my HR background. And again, I just love to see financial services space, our banks, our credit unions really offer more to our small businesses so we can keep that, shop small, support local movement going.
I love your passion, and I can feel that. And folks that are, if you're listening right now, I want you to stop and write this down. A lattice, not a ladder. I just love that. That sounds like a book, Tiffany. Hey, I want to go back just real quick, as you talked about something that caught my attention. And that was, you said you went to college in the day and worked at night. How hard was
Yep.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking, but it was tough. I remember, and I was poor. Like I didn't have any money, my parents weren't paying my way. I remember on Friday nights, there was somebody I worked in the call center with. She was an older woman. And, I'd balance my checkbook because we had checkbooks back then, on payday. And I would have like $7 left for the week. And Patty was her name. Patty would always buy me pizza on Friday, just kind of because she knew I was like bootstrapping it, trying to get through school. But it was good. It gave me a head start. I started at 19 at Jack Henry. So I was super young. And so as I was learning these things in college, I really could see some of the application take place. So I don't always recommend it for everybody. I didn't have this great college life and tons of friends because I worked. But I'm super grateful for it now and having made that choice because it's really paid off.
I wanted to ask that question because I did something similar. So I went to school, and then I decided, hey, I'm going to quit school, go to work. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have some children. Oh, now I'm going to go back to school. And so I went back to school, and I worked I went to college in the day and worked at night, had 2 children, and it was very difficult. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up was because there's people that are listening that are like, hey, I need to do this, or I want to do this. And what I want to point out is that sometimes there's sacrifice, right? That
Yeah,
you got to make in
for
order
sure.
to achieve that. You talked about your grandfather, and then of course you just now talked about Patty pizza.
Yeah.
I think about Pizza Patty now.
Pizza patty.
Talk
That's right.
about. I would love to hear, like, so you've had a great career so far.
Mhm.
I would love to hear, like, were there some people that
Mhm.
helped you along the way? And I call them mentors.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about some people that have helped you get to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I would be amiss if I didn't mention my husband first. So we met I think got married at 25, met at 24. So I was just out of grad school. But my husband has really been, he's truly the leadership lane hero, as maybe you would say,
I
Bruce.
love that.
He keeps my life between the ditches. I know we were chatting before the podcast started. I was like, we were remodeling right now. We're moving my grandma out. We're moving a foster child in. And I'm flying to New York here in a couple hours, and he's just the steady rock of the family that really keeps me centered and grounded. So first and foremost, I got to mention him. And then professionally, I would say maybe not one person, but
Mm.
always someone in that next step. It didn't matter like what role I was taking. I think there was just like this providential hand that just brought me just the right person to help me in that season. And I look back at all the changes I made, and there was inevitably just the right person. So I think my challenge to everybody out there listening is like, you can be that person. Sometimes we think mentors are like these big folks that stick with us for 10 years, and there are people like that. I have people like that too, but I also have these folks that are just seasonal and just came alongside. And I think it's beautiful because we get to be that.
Mm.
Sometimes we just need to think like, maybe I'm just the right person for that individual in that season, versus thinking I've got to make this multi-year investment. So anyways, I have tons of people to be grateful for and to.
Oh, I absolutely love that, and I love how you said always someone,
Mhm.
and that's very inspiring for. And I know there's people listening right now are like, hey, I can mentor too, and I can mentor just through modeling. I can mentor by what I post on social media. There's so many different ways to mentor, and then of course. One of the things I wanted to ask you, and I love to ask this question because it kind of goes along with, when I wrote my first book, Find Your Lane. And it was really about finding your purpose, your calling. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'm curious, like, was there a moment when you like found your lane?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was a moment, but I can definitely point to an experience. And that
Mm,
was when I became chief people officer at Jack Henry. So that was 2016.
okay.
I was the youngest executive named at that point. I was the only female reporting to the CEO at that time. And since then, much has changed. And it's been beautiful to just see the progress through those years. But I really had sat at the crossroads of technology and financial institutions, and it tends to lean male. And so I really had to know who was I, and
Mm,
how did I want to lead, both authentically and in a way that honored my values and my belief system. And of course, like, you don't become CPO and like just magically all those things like come into play. So there was this journey of learning and discovery. And I can look back on that 6 years and think, gosh, those were some of the brightest and the darkest seasons of my career, personally and professionally. It's one of those roles that I think it holds both tremendous sorrow and this inexpressible joy. Because you're coming alongside, in my case, thousands and thousands of people. And I suppose that's how I was kind of ushered into my purpose, not to be just a CPO, but really to learn to lead with love, and
mm,
to make the hard decisions and to call the hard shots. And I made deep mistakes. I made hurtful decisions. I, maybe was too quick in my response at times. And when you do that at that level, again, you're affecting thousands and thousands of people. So it wasn't without rupture, but it was also not without redemption. And so I think just learning that process and taking that journey as a leader has rewired me as who I am and as the person that I want to be.
I love that so much. And as you shared who was I thought about, it's not about what we want to achieve, it's about who we want to be.
Mhm.
And I love everything you shared there. As you shared, like you're talking about brightness and darkness, I
Mhm.
immediately failure just comes to mind. I
Yeah.
remember when I published my first book, I remember when I sent it out, I was like, oh no, what did I do? And because I was very vulnerable and I was
I
sharing
yeah.
lots of failure. I made so many mistakes early in my career, and people resonate with that. And I think that as you share that, people are like, wow, I know that, with success, failure is that
Mhm.
stepping stone, right? So,
Yeah.
did I mean, how, like, where's that vulnerability come from, Tiffany?
I think it's been a journey of just humility
Mm,
and my faith. And you we just, particularly in, Western culture, like it's all about the highs and the highlight reels and the success. And I did this deal and here I did
Mm,
like, and I just think we don't spend enough time like lamenting over our mistakes. And I
mm,
remember one time, I was talking to a leader, and it was, I won't go into the details because you got to take everything to the grave. But, I remember him saying to me, like, how did we get here? Like, how did we let this happen? And, as I was kind of like going back in history, I was like, because this happened and this happened and this happened. And we never took the time to mourn and to lament the mistake that we made.
mm,
And
mm,
so we just let it fester. And then we got here, we just woke up and we're like, oh my gosh, how did we let that happen? And so I just think there is a time for joy and there is a time for sorrow, and we have to truly press into, not just the highlight reels, but be super vulnerable, because, vulnerability begets vulnerability. When I share something that I'm not perfect at and I messed up, I said this or I did this, and this was what I learned from it. Like, it creates these safe spaces where people are, can then share back. And it's as we begin to tell our story to each other, which is an imperfect story, that then we begin to really heal and hear and to
mm.
understand. And so often, it's too positional, right? It becomes too divisive because I've got my opinion and you've got your opinion. But we really need to learn to honor each other's story. It doesn't mean we have to
Mm,
agree with it. It doesn't mean
mm,
we have to think that you did the right thing or I did the right thing, right? But just learning to listen and to hear just creates that vulnerability. And I believe vulnerability creates healing, and we need that. Like, we particularly need that right now. But we've always needed it.
I love that. Honor the story. That is
Yeah.
fantastic. Hey, let's talk leadership. Here we are,
Mhm.
2022. A lot's
Yeah.
changed in the last couple of
Oh
years, hasn't it?
gosh.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. One of the things I do like to ask my guests is, leadership, it can mean so many different things to many
Mhm.
different people. But for you, Tiffany, if someone says, hey, what's leadership to you? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. That's always a tough one for me. Like, I can't just, spat out an answer of like what I think a leader is. But I do like to talk a lot about the characteristics of
Mm,
leaders, because we
mm,
don't all, we're not all things all the time to all people. We all have different parts of leadership that we're growing into. We have parts that we're really strong in. So I like to focus like less about the definition and more about like what is the character that and the integrity that we're trying to develop from a leadership perspective. And for me, that's really threefold. So, when I think about leaders who are healthy and who are whole have the ability to hold heartache and hope together
mm,
with confidence. So I can hold two opposing truths and still figure out how to move the people forward to meaningful action. And I think that's really missing today. So many leaders take a position on which side of the aisle they're on, and really we drain our energy and our power when we do that. Really, we've got to just listen. Like, we've got to listen to the heartache, we've got to listen to the hope, and we got to meet people where they are, right? And then
mm.
once we do that, then we can move forward together. So I think first and foremost, that's something that is a good characteristic of leadership. Second, I think whole leaders are really great storytellers and story
Mm,
guides, because they've lived it and they can listen, and we talked about this earlier, right? There's times to grieve, and I think we need to grieve and probably do more of that. There's time for joy. But too often I just argue that the organizations hide their stories of guilt and shame, and we seek to elevate success, right? That's how marketing works. That's how LinkedIn works. That's how Instagram works, right? But it's just so important for a leader to be able to allow people to tell their story, but also guide them through it. So, true organizational health and wholeness can really only be recognized when we authentically encounter the truth. And we need storytellers to kind of help guide and call out and navigate those waters, because we got to own everything, right? We got to own the good and the bad. And then lastly, I just say, leadership is about protection and it's about provision. There's only so many resources to go around. And yet, we have to determine, how are we going to stand against injustice? Leaders are called to rise up and to repair the ruptures that have occurred, either through their own decisions or through those around, right? It's just a broken world. We're there to offer redemption. We're there to offer direction, even in the face of a lot of criticism. And that takes courage and that takes strength. So those are kind of, I guess, my threefold answer to maybe not a definition of leadership, but what do I think about when I think about leadership?
Hey, I want to ask you a question. One of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the podcast was you've made a change. You were at a company for a long time. I've been at my organization for 19 years. So
Yeah, there you
I'm
go.
like here resonating with you going, wow, she
Yeah.
was there for a long time. How challenging was it to make that change? You mentioned that you took a risk, and I can tell you're like so excited about where you're at today. I could feel it. But talk a little bit about that, and then I would love to hear, like, do you have? I mean, does a leader at the top? Do you have like I was thinking about the president. Whenever they're elected president, they have this 100-day plan. After 100
Right.
days, everybody wants to know, did they achieve all these things? Do you
Yeah.
have a 100-day plan, or what's that look like when you move to an organization
Mhm.
as a high performing leader?
Yeah. So I think the first question was, what was I scared? Maybe it's probably the best.
Okay, sure, yes.
Yeah, I really was. I really was, because I was super comfortable. I had been at Jack Henry for 19 years. When I started, it was 1,200 people. When I left, it was 6,700. I knew how the organization worked, right? I knew how to get my ideas through. I knew who to connect with. You just become comfortable with the way and how I navigate. And it was a wrestling of, I kind of knew what I wanted my next steps to be. And I really had to wrestle with letting go of some of the things that I wanted and the way that I wanted them. Right. And just to allow and kind of surrender, like, okay, I need to let go of that. And just allow things to happen naturally. And so it was really, learning to verbalize what I wanted. Like, I think I want to do something different, having those conversations. Who can you connect me with?
Mm.
And just giving myself permission to discover, because I really didn't, like, I want to go work at Fingercheck. Like, I didn't even know who these folks were, and I wasn't even looking, I was actually looking at board roles, and that's how I got connected. And then it turned into COO. But I really had to give myself permission to not know, to not force it to figure out, and to know, like, just when to let go. And once I did that, once I kind of went through that, even like spiritual journey of releasing it and not knowing what the next step was, once things started to happen and introductions and conversations, like, I just knew. Like, it was just, there's this
Mm.
movie called Soul Surfer. I don't know if you've seen it. It's
I
about
have
Bethany.
seen it.
Yeah,
Yes.
about Bethany Hamilton, who's the big time, national surfing champion. But there's a scene at the very end of the movie, you can look it up on YouTube, where, all the other surfers have kind of pulled back because they just don't see any waves coming. She kind of puts her hand in the water because she feels it. Like, she knows
Mm,
something is out in the deep, and
mm,
she just starts paddling, and everybody else is kind of like, where is she going? Like, what's happening? Because they just can't see anything out on the horizon. And then she just catches this killer wave and does this barrel, and it's amazing. And so that's kind of how I would describe the moment. Like, I knew something was upon me. I didn't know what it was. And I just started paddling right out into the deep ocean. And I think that that wave will come, but yeah, it's scary. It is, because there's nobody else out there with you in the ocean.
I got to tell you, right now, like I have like chills. You telling me this story, like you felt it. I
Yeah.
love that. So, okay, so you joined the organization so do you? I mean, obviously the company has goals, they have
Yeah.
objectives. You kind of put some things around that, but I mean, do you have like a,
So I went into, from corporate into like late stage startups. So it is different.
yeah,
It's a little bit more wild west, which I knew that going in, and I'm good with that, right? That's where my strength is, to kind of bring order to chaos. So I really just gave myself permission the first 30 days to just take it in, like just
hmm,
absorb,
yeah,
meet people, understand the product, understand the market, understand the technology underpinning everything, get to know folks, just take it in and hop around, and be really sporadic, and not come in with like, here's my 3-point game plan of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to get it done. Right. Just let it wash over you a little bit. And then, I'll hit kind of July, August timeframe where I'll be able to see, okay, here's the next 3 things that we need to do or move forward as an organization. So,
yeah.
yes and no. I'm very type A plan person,
Mm,
but I really was intentional about like stepping back and not coming in like I've done it one way for 20 years almost, right?
mm,
And just because that is a way, or it is a best practice, it doesn't mean it's right for Fingercheck. And I need to, again, we talked about honoring the story. Like, you need to honor the story
mm,
of how this company got where they are today, which is incredible. Like, they don't even hardly do any marketing and sales, and they've built all this revenue. It's just like, okay, something works great, and I don't want to break it just because I want to make you more relevant and more modern in some of the approaches, but there'll be a balance, right? And as long as we can have dialogue through that, we'll create the right path forward. So that's, I guess, my 100-day plan.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I love how you said, hey, you know what? I came in with an open mind. I'm going to assess. I want to know, hey, where are we
Mhm.
at and where do I fit in? And how can I bring
Yeah.
it together? I love all that. I
Mhm.
want to, ask, so I gave you some questions before we, started. And one of the things I did want to ask, because I just came back from Sherm National
Yeah.
and I didn't have this on the question. So
Okay.
forgive me.
Dang.
But one of the things that keeps coming up is the employee experience. I just
Mhm.
keep hearing that over and
Yeah.
over and over. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the employee experience and maybe something you do at Fingercheck
Mhm.
or you're going to try to do or
Mhm.
something Fingercheck already does
Yeah.
to create that employee experience? Because we know now we're in a challenging time, right? I mean, everybody's talking
Mhm.
about recruiting and retention, but that employee
Yeah.
experience is the key, right?
It is, and it's very challenging. And I always say there's no silver bullet. There's like
Yeah.
lots and lots of lead bullets that you have to put at it.
Yeah.
And really, when I think about employee experience, what you're trying to do organizationally is you have, whatever your number of people who have an equal number of unique stories, right? Things that motivate them, things that they care about, experiences they've had that makes them, gravitate towards certain values or certain beliefs, right? So now you have all these people together with all these unique stories, unique beliefs, unique values. And as an organization, you're trying to find unity, and that doesn't
Mm,
always mean we think the same, but we do need everybody to row in the same direction, right? You get to hold your uniqueness, but I need you true north, and here's how we get there, right? And so when we think about employee experience, I believe like the first thing we have to do is just talk. Like, we have to have
mm,
dialogue around a couple key areas that are important for organizational health. Your relationship with your manager. Do you feel this is a safe working environment and you can speak up? Do you understand and do you resonate with the purpose and the values of the organization and where we're
mm,
headed? Like, if you're not into small business and supporting small business and removing stress from people's lives, like, don't come to work for us.
Right.
Go somewhere else, so we have to do the research, but that requires us to articulate well what we do as an organization and what we do care about. And so when I think about experience, I think in those terms, like, at some point we kind of got to figure out where we're rowing, how we're going to get there, and what meaning that really brings the world, and get all the employees to, come alongside in that.
I love what you shared there, because as I think about that, I think about, the experience also is you really are with something bigger, like than a
Mhm.
job. When you're all
Mhm.
rowing together, you all
Yeah.
know where you're going, and you're communicating, you're talking, you're sharing, you're honoring the story, all of that. All of a sudden, I feel like you're with something, with an organization that's bigger than a job. And so I appreciate you shared that. And I think that's what people want today. They want to know
Yeah.
that they're part of something more than just
Mhm.
coming in to work, right?
Yeah, I think ideally most people want that. I think others, they do just want to get paid, and,
Sure.
and I think it's balancing the two, right?
Yeah.
How do we create purpose and meaning but not create noise?
Yeah.
For those who just, I'm just here to kind of get my job done, and because we need those people too. But I do agree, especially with the last couple years, there has been that shift to kind of that power shift where it's like going back to the employees, and they're getting more of a say in how things need to work and integrate. And that's needed. That balance needs to happen.
Love that. Hey, I want to ask you one last question here before we move on. And that is, you're new in an organization. How do you create influence, and how do others listening today that have made a change, or they want to be more influential, any thoughts around developing influence in the workplace?
Yeah. Grab a cup of coffee. Sit down with people. Like,
Love
it's
that.
interesting. Like, I'm not extroverted. People are like, oh my gosh, you'll get up on stage, you'll talk. It's like, I'm not extroverted. When I go into the office, like, one of my fears is like just walking up to somebody randomly and starting to talk to them. Like, I would rather just die, even if they were the most friendliest person, because I just don't do, it's just not me. So I have to figure out, like, how do I connect with people in a way that's authentic to myself while I'm challenging myself to kind of get out there more. So for me, at Fingercheck, like, one of the first things I did was an employee experience survey, just like a pulse check, like 5 questions,
Okay.
with commentary. We're small enough. I'll kind of get those key themes together. We'll do some roundtables, but it's really the dialogue that I think truly matters. And it's hard when you're in such a large organization. I get it. Like, it's just more challenging, but you have the benefit of more, width and less depth, which is also valuable. So you just kind of got to figure out how to play that. But nothing beats just me and Bruce talking and relating as people, and me hearing your story and where you came from, and kind of, piecing together, why you make the decisions that you're making and what's driving that. And then once I can understand that, then I can figure out how we can move together. Cause I do believe in, like, no loser policy. Like, we talk a lot about compromise, like, okay, I'll give you this and you give me that, and then we're okay. Like, we're good with this. But really, compromise is compromise. Like,
Mm,
I'm compromising on something that I believe needs to happen. And so then it can kind of create dysfunction. But if we can come into a conversation and say, okay, no loser policy, right? It takes a little bit more time, but there's things that I'm unwilling to relinquish, and there's things you're unwilling to relinquish. Can we understand each other in that, and then figure out how to move forward, right? And that takes conversation, takes dialogue. Compromise is the shorter route, but no loser policy will will stand the course of time, in my opinion, because we truly are united. It doesn't mean we agree on everything, but we're united in how we're going to move forward.
I love that. No loser
No
policy.
loser
I have not
policy.
heard that before. I
Okay.
love that. I just wrote that down. That's fantastic. I love what you said, because in chapter 3 of my book, Life in the Leadership Lane, I talk about developing influence, or I call it speaking
Mhm.
influence. And I feel like there's these 5 stages. And the very first stage is trust. And a lot of people try to skip that step
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
about building relationships, and building relationships takes a long time, right?
It does. It
You know,
does. It takes more effort. Sometimes it doesn't maybe take as much time, but it definitely takes more
yeah.
effort. And that was something I very much looked at when I moved to Fingercheck. Like Joel as the CEO, and in conversation with him, I could just tell, like, okay, I can trust him. Like,
Mm,
he's going to hear me. He may
huge.
not always agree with me, and I don't want him to always agree with me. And he shouldn't always, vice versa, right? Like that's how you get to the best ideas. But I knew if I could trust him as a human and relate to him, we're going to be just fine, because we can work through the hard stuff. And I
Mm,
can see that, even in my Jack Henry days, those same types of patterns. And I think trust is twofold, right? There's competence
mm,
and there's character. And sometimes we have to say, well, I don't trust that person. And I always push back a little bit. Well, what don't you trust about them? Is it their competence level? Because that very much is valid in the business world. But or you don't trust their character, right? So people may lead off. I know we're kind of like going on to a tangent here,
I
but I think
love
it's
this.
important for
Yeah.
for the listeners, um, to really kind of step back and say, well, where is the trust fracture happening? Because I'll hear people say, "Oh, they're a really nice person," but okay, so you trust their character,
Mm,
but you don't trust their competence, which is a problem when we're
mm,
trying to run a business, right? Or they're really smart, but they're a jerk, right? Okay,
mm,
so you trust their competence, but they're showing up as a jerk. And I think those are opportunities as leaders that we have to kind of fix that rupture. We have to go to the person and say, hey, here's the perception and here's the behavior, and whether it's reality
mm.
or not, like this is how people are taking you in. And I want people to be able to do that, to me as well, because we're all trying to, become more healthy as leaders. So trust, dialogue, all those things are super important on the building of influence.
I appreciate you sharing that. I have not really heard it shared like that. Trusting your competence versus your character. And a lot of times you hear that around salespeople. Like, I
Hmm.
don't trust them. Well, is it their,
Yeah.
but as I think about that now, I think about, well, is it their character you don't trust, or their competence? Because maybe they're very competent and you don't trust the character, and so therefore you have to, and then you can know how to approach that, right? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Tiffany, that is fantastic. This is so helpful. I guarantee there's people right now taking notes. I have a full page of notes right here as I'm taking, and I told you the time was going to fly by.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one question before we go to it's time to accelerate. And I always like to ask my guests, have you ever been given some advice in your life? It could have been when you were
Mhm.
growing up, going to college, at
Mhm.
your last job, or even today. Any advice you were given that you just found it so good that you find yourself sharing with others?
Couple things. I
Okay.
think as a leader, first and foremost, someone told me once, like, always share your calendar, like publicly. Like
Okay.
they need to know when you're making dinner. They need to know, like, you got a dentist appointment. You're going to have coffee with a friend. And I thought that was really good because it kind of goes back to the vulnerability play, but it reminds people that you're
Mm-hmm.
human, right? Like
Mm,
I have 4 boys at home and we foster a little girl. So I have 5 kids, right? Like I have things to do that aren't just finger check related. Like I like to have friends too. Like I got to go coffee. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to get my work done. Right. But I just thought that was really helpful to, as a leader, particularly if you manage other people, let them see your calendar, like let them know that you're human. So I think that's a really, I guess probably the one that sticks out the most for me.
I got it. I got to tell you, I am like, I'm having chills once again because I do share my calendar. But as you say that, I'm thinking, okay, right in haircut, right in. I'm taking my
Yeah,
grandkids to the World Aquarium on that
there you
day and
go.
let them know that, you know what, I have these other things in my life too. And I think when people see that, there, it's almost like you're being a role model to give people permission to be themselves.
Hmm.
Just get your work
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Yeah. Get your work done. Like I still got to get my stuff done too. And we, got to be there and respond
So
to our
good.
Slack messages and stuff. But, we're all human, right?
So good. So inspiring. Hey, I want to let's go ahead and go to It's Time to Accelerate. We have our
Mhm.
last few minutes for the show. I always like to ask some fun questions. So Tiffany, would you rather read a book or listen to a podcast? I'm curious.
Book. My husband is the podcaster.
Okay.
I'm the book reader, and I tend to read 3 to 4 at a time. Like I can't just read one. I read them all and then they just like magically come together in my mind.
Any I'm curious from a leader's perspective, any books that you've read this year that you
Yeah. I've read
would
a
recommend?
ton, but
Yep.
Redeeming Heartache is fantastic if you
Okay.
want to really learn about people's story. Hard Thing About Hard Things, that's like a
Hmm.
classic for me by Ben Horowitz. The Secrets of Sand Hill Road is really good. Those are the three that come to
I
mind
love
right
that.
now.
I love
Yeah,
that. I'll put those in the
Kryptonians. Yeah, those are all
I'll
good ones.
I'll put those in the show notes. So if someone wants to check those out, they can definitely do that. Okay, a couple more questions, and I want to ask you. Like I know it sounds like you're very busy. I mean, you're working, you got all your children, but what energizes you? What sets you on
Yeah.
fire?
Taking a nap is really energizing.
I love
I
that. That's what
lay
my
in the
wife would say.
hammock. Yeah, no, it's good. I lay in the hammock. I love to be outside. I don't want to necessarily like work outside. I don't want to like
Yeah,
garden or I just want to lay there. And,
yeah,
we live in the country, which is by design. So,
love that.
I read a lot and I just like to chill. I like to be with the fam, but yeah,
I love
just
that. Oh my gosh.
getting
Okay,
calm.
final question. Tiffany, 10 years older, is
Yeah.
knocking at your door. And you're going to
Okay.
go answer that door. What's she going to
Mhm.
tell you?
I told you that you could do hard things.
Mm,
Yep.
oh man, that's so good. That's a very wise Tiffany, 10 years older. Oh,
Yeah.
I
I think
love
the
that.
other one would be "You Are Enough," which I believe
Mm,
is the statement Holly Novak gave on the podcast
hmm.
when you interviewed her. And those were my parting words to Holly. I was like, you're getting ready to be a chief people officer of a huge organization, for almost $2 billion and 6,700 people. And you need to know that you know that you know that you are enough.
How special is that to get that kind of advice from an outgoing leader? That's incredible. So I'm sure that meant a lot to her. And hey, you also, I'm just going to, as we close here, as you mentioned that you are enough. I noticed that you also have a blog, and I've
Mhm.
really enjoyed reading your blog. And one of those I think was around you're enough. I mean, I think you were writing several in 2020 when everybody
Yeah.
was having a hard time. But I just love that. I was curious what drove you to start writing a blog, or is that just a,
Yeah. So my blog is divinelyinterrupted.com.
yeah,
I always say I was a blogger before it was cool, like probably like 12 years ago, I started blogging. And really that was just the outpouring, I think, of my faith and my
mm,
beliefs
yeah,
and just wanting to teach people truth because we have a lot of lies, we have a lot of noise.
yeah,
And then over time, it's just taken different twists and turns. I'll talk about culture, I'll talk about old soul thoughts and just the life in my mind, which is pretty messy some days. So, I just want people to know that, you're not by yourself. This is hard stuff.
yeah.
I don't have it all figured out. I don't have my life all put together. But there are people advocating for you and people that want to speak encouragement and hope and inspiration into your life, because it absolutely matters. So
Well, I'll put that in the show notes as well. And you're definitely driving in the leadership lane. So for someone who heard something on the podcast today and they want to connect with you or they want to follow you, how would be the best way for them to connect?
yeah, LinkedIn is a great avenue. I try to stay pretty active on LinkedIn. You can also subscribe to my blog
Yeah.
at divinelyinterrupted.com. Those are probably the two ways to hear or read as most frequent. And, I just welcome anybody. You can direct message me on LinkedIn. I will respond as long as you're not selling me something.
And I
um,
was, yeah, and I always like to say that if you're going to connect with Tiffany or anyone really, write a note. Hey, I heard you on Life in the Leadership Lane
yeah,
podcast, and I thought this
absolutely.
particular point, resonated with me, or something like that.
Yeah.
And
We need
talk about building
encouragement too.
trust. That's the
Yeah,
way
we
you
need
do it, right?
encouragement too. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
So,
I appreciated you coming on the show today and just
oh,
sharing
what
your
a joy.
perspective, your wisdom. It's been so great. I appreciate your friendship, and I can't wait to share this conversation.
Good. I loved it. Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
You're welcome.